There is a truth in Battletech. War between the stars is only possible because of two things, inevitably. The first is the Jumpship, an invention from 1,000 years prior to the current setting of Battletech. But the other is its peer, recognized or not, the Dropship. The latter is the subject of this video. Dropships are an invention of the 25th century, at least as an official term, but their origins go back to the earliest days of stellar colonization. While jumpships could slip between the stars using their KF drives, appearing seemingly in an instant, they had no ability to make planetfall on the worlds that they would discover, as their structures simply could not survive planetary pressures from entry or even staying in atmosphere. The field they emitted around themselves that allows them to jump faster than light only could move the jumpship itself to its destination in these early days. These primitive vessels would continue to develop, and eventually huge bays were added to them, creating shuttle bays, in fact. Shuttles were the first vessels to touch down on the surface of alien worlds. With their arrival, humans would begin taking steps onto these new planets, and in some cases, taking steps onto their new homes. As these new colonies were established, they were dependent on resources from the outside, and goods would need to be produced in the solar system before being sent out to the distant stars and worlds now occupied by new peoples. Again, the shuttle would be the primary way to move these goods from space to the planet below, before returning to the immense jump vessels which had delivered them in the first place. During this time, they would begin to earn a nickname from those who operated them or relied on them. The term being used was Dropship. It came about for several reasons, you might imagine. These vessels would often be full of passengers, cargo, or both. They would be thrust into a system and lay within the jumpship which brought them. The doors would open, and they would immediately drop towards their destination. The real differences between shuttles and dropships would become apparent much later, as the term dropship was adopted more formally in the 25th century, canonizing a series of specific differences between the two. There are two which are the most prevalent, though other distinctions exist as well. Shuttles were typically housed within the original dropships themselves in large shuttle bays, and would be limited often by their maximum cargo weight, which was typically about 100 tons. Though the vessels themselves could be up to 5,000 tons in weight and could carry more under the right conditions. This limitation was due to needing to be housed within the larger craft. This ended with the innovation of hardpoints and KF booms, allowing dropships to latch on to specific points on the outside of newer jumpships, and travel through a much larger KF field that the jumpship could generate. This advancement resulted in shuttles exploding in their size, going from craft that fit inside of shuttle bays to enormous monsters that overshadow 5,000 tons quite easily and quite often. To give scale to these newer vessels, they could reach the gigantic size of up to 100,000 tons. These are the two primary differences between dropships and shuttles. They hook onto the outside of jump vessels, not needing a bay, and their size was many-fold larger. These changes also meant that systems could be refined to focus on weaponry, speed, or cargo space. The older shuttle designs, due to needing to be housed within jumpships, also had to inefficiently use their weight as well. Dropships are not mere shuttlecraft as a result. With their growth and their true arrival, it transformed much of the inner sphere as it was colonizing and growing outwards, spreading to all of the easily accessible systems and worlds nearby. Far larger volumes of people and general goods could be transported now between regions. Dropships may be major military assets in the minds of many, but the truth is they are the mules. The trains, the logistics of all interstellar trade. Without them, worlds that mined resources could not get them to production worlds that need them. Food would not be able to go from more agrarian planets to more populous ones. Finished industrial goods would not arrive either, preventing the spread of technology and advanced equipment. In essence, human society, as we understand it in Battletech, would be impossible without these vessels and the goods they transport. The world would be a quiet, dark place, even if there were colonies across just as many stars. During all of this time of developments from shuttles to proper dropships, mankind wasn't simply peacefully trading amongst themselves and expanding across habitable worlds, or terraforming. Nation-states would appear as small kingdoms that were being formed out of clusters of worlds, from the inner sphere to the periphery, even before the decline of what had been the first true Terran Empire, the Terran Alliance. Shuttles would first be used for military purposes to perform these roles, and soon there would be dropships specifically built for this task in mind. The first true dropships were born in the 2400s, in a large era that is still referred to as the Age of War. Battle mechs in Battletech are considered the apex of terrestrial combat in the setting. These steel colossuses have dominated battlefields since their introduction, but how were they deployed? Mechs in some ways predated the modern dropship as we understand it. There were few instances of successful combat deployments of these mighty war machines in the first years of their appearance. It can be presumed that they would have been deployed after bridgeheads were made by other forces, or to planets with friendly logistics and control, either bolstering defenders or to help worlds which had internal disputes, rather than for the purpose of easy conquests. Despite their raw power, they were in essence logistically difficult to get on site to perform their destructive acts. Regardless of specifics, it's openly stated that military transport craft of this era could only effectively land and deploy infantry, tanks, and other vehicle assets, not the mighty battle mechs the series is well known for. This would start to change with the first mech-carrying dropship, a converted cargo ship, the humblest of war vessels, the Manatee. It would be the Terran hegemony that would first deploy this, wanting desperately to begin to use their new war machines in a meaningful capacity. Finding the Manatee to be an adequate hull to attempt this with, it would become the first true mech carrier. This transport, or rather dropship, was capable of deploying up to a full lance of mechs at one time, and these mechs would exit the craft prepared for combat, able to take the fight to their enemies immediately upon deployment. This innovation changed the face of warfare in the inner sphere. This world-changing vessel was hardly the enormous craft that later dropships would end up being, weighing 1,900 tons. It's also interesting that many future military dropships would mirror the Manatee's appearance, taking on its egg-like shape and deployment. This would be common for dropships by this time. It can be assumed that the Terrans would have taken this shape into consideration for their future dropships as well. What's most interesting, though, is that this vessel, despite its significant impact on the inner sphere, was a failure. This new concept in military transport would first see combat operations on Kentaris against an early armed forces of the Federated Suns in 2449. In the fighting, the Davion defenders realized quickly that mechs were appearing on the front lines as the invaders came to their border, and the defenders began to target these ships with all available means. The results were catastrophic losses for the attacking Terrans, which lost multiple dropships, their crews, and all the mechs on board in a series of cataclysmic interceptions. Eventually, the Terrans would begin to heavily screen these craft with fighters, but even by then it was viewed that the Manatee, though it had changed how the Terrans would deploy future forces, was not up to the task it was intended for, but it had provided them with the information they needed going forward. War would never be the same. New designs would begin to evolve from these humble beginnings during the era of the Star League. The era which would begin a little over a century after the Battle of Candaris. What would happen from this point on would be an evolution of these designs across the board. Even prior to this, newer and more dangerous landing craft had been developed. But with the reunification wars present, followed by an era of unprecedented development, prosperity, and investment, this would spur on a series of evolutions in the designs across the board. Gone was the Manatee's limited protection and storage capacity. Gone, too, was the era of civilian dropships converted into military ones. Instead, several distinct groups began to appear, each with their own role, either military or civilian in nature, creating the primary ecosystem that would be in place for much of the Inner Sphere's history, even up to the Ilclan era. From the Star League, even through the darkness of the latter succession wars, and into the eras beyond, the primary roles of modern dropships have not changed, even if they have been refined or given advanced clan technologies. To break these down into their approximate categories, they are troop carriers, mech carriers, assault ships, fighter carriers, and civilian ships. Let's start with the ones closest to the original shuttles that once took into the void in the first days of humanity's spread across the stars, at least militarily. The troop and vehicle carriers. War, before battle mechs, was as one might imagine modern war to be. Tanks ruled the battlefield, along with other armored combat vehicles. While it seems plausible that vehicle bays and mech bays may be the same thing, this is dramatically out of touch with reality. Vehicles tend to either have their own dedicated bays on a dropship, such as the case with the Fortress dropship, or have their own dedicated dropships, entirely fitted with vehicle bays. More often than not, these have compartments for holding infantry formations as well, though this is not always the case, and there are some dedicated infantry transport dropships as well. The largest example of troop and vehicle carriers in operation in the Inner Sphere as of 3057 is the Hercules dropship, which comes in at a massive 7,200 tons, and carries 1,381 tons of cargo space, 36 heavy vehicles, and 12 full infantry platoons. On the battlefields of the Inner Sphere, unsurprisingly, while mechs may be king, most of the fighting taking place on the ground level is between infantry and perhaps light to heavy vehicles. Those who possess mechs tend to hold sway over who will win a campaign, but in many instances of war, and even battles, they are fought wholly by men with rifles, backed up by armored fighting vehicles. These campaigns are wholly dependent, in terms of their supplies, and their ability to lift off planet and make planet fall on these troop carriers, descendants of the first true military dropships. Though classified as dropships, some of these vehicles are in fact incapable of atmospheric flight. These weapons of war are not true transports, but a series of designs developed to attack and destroy other dropships and aero assets, or to clear landing zones in major planetary assaults. Assault ships either defend the space around a world, acting as a monitor, or they are attack dogs, trying to strike out and destroy craft before they can land, or simply ward them away. Alternatively, they may be in the attack, sweeping towards worlds while covering their fellow dropships, attacking and destroying anything that attempts to disrupt or disable their allied ships' missions. Their designs are radically different from those dropships built to land, often looking more like an immense fighter craft, or a steel dart in the void. An example of one of these ships would be the Achilles assault dropship, which weighs in at an immense 4,500 tons, with over half of its overall weight dedicated to its enormous Xerxes 12S engines, which clock in at 2,390 tons in weight. Though it carries infantry on board to repel boarders, this dropship only has a storage capacity of 250 tons for excess cargo, and no bays for vehicles or battle mechs, though it does have several fighter bays and 2 onboard shuttles for transportation of the crew. In the space between planets, ships such as the Achilles are true terrors, barring the rare and devastating warships of the Star League and later eras. As one can imagine, dropships are not all built for combat. In fact, the majority of them don't fit into such a role. As mentioned prior, the very blood vessels that connect the Inner Sphere's economies together is run not just by jumpships, but by these immense vessels loading and unloading precious cargo across ports and landing pads in every world from the distant Periphery to the core worlds around Terra. It matters not what the belief of the rulers of most of these planets think. Goods will flow. Especially with how vital many materials and food are to the survivability of most planets, or for the hope of keeping the fires of any advanced industries alive, regardless of if it is the Succession Wars or the cusp of the Ilclan era and the darkness caused by Grey Monday's HPG blackout. The largest example of a dropship in this category is the enormous Behemoth class. This 100,000-ton vehicle is the largest dropship ever constructed, even bigger, physically, than many jumpships. It carries a staggering 80,000 tons of cargo roughly, as well as 20 small spacecraft. It is barely armed and barely armored, though it is very obvious as to why, as this is not a combat vessel. This gigantic spaceship is one of many civilian types, but it is the apex of them. Civilian ships are likely the most important of all. Nothing could or would get done without them. It's easy to always imagine the military first, but the truth is, day-to-day life for people feeds every aspect of the state. There would be no military without them. It would appear that in Battletech, air power and space power are not things of the past in any era of warfare. Having evolved in the First and Second World Wars on Earth, humanity would always find value in this technology, especially as it advanced. Among the stars, aerospace fighters are as deadly as any vessel in numbers. Even the terrifying battleships that lurk in the silent void of space fear them. And rightly so. It was a lone fighter craft that slowed the entire clan invasion to a near halt, disabling the direwolf by crashing into its bridge and killing Ilclan Liao Showers in the act. To underestimate their power in space and an atmosphere is foolhardy in the extreme. Fighters find themselves inside many dropships, including ones designed to deploy vehicles or battle mechs, but there are dedicated fighter carriers as well. The purpose behind these is manyfold. Fighters in numbers are dangerous to any craft in space, such as warships, and they are dangerous to any dropship attempting to make a landing on a world, or in other words, invading a planet. They also can do devastating ground attacks or provide air superiority to ground forces. These dropships provide the means for all of these things, whether it be space battles or ground support operations. During the liberation of Terra, fighter dropships were instrumental in knocking out ground positions, and driving back the Rimworld's army's aero assets. Without these kinds of dropships, the liberation of Terra from Emeris' mad rule would have never succeeded. The largest example of one of these in use in the Inner Sphere as of 3057 is the Vengeance class. This giant, weighing in at 11,000 tons, carries a more than impressive 40 fighter craft in total in its 2 bays. The power of this kind of force can bring small armies to their knees, or threaten ill-prepared invasion forces with their ultimate undoing before they even touch the ground. Though many may not see it, as so much is focused on the ground. Of all dropships, perhaps the fighter carriers are not only the deadliest, but the most prominent. They decide in many cases if battles can even be joined at all. The most famous dropships are those which carry the premier fighting units to the field of battle in the setting. The most recognizable dropships fall within this category. The legendary Leopard, Union, and Overlord class vessels are icons of the series and are known by almost every Battletech player, regardless of their interest or knowledge in the spacefaring portion of the universe. These ships are the great arcs which carry within them the movers of the setting, the mechs and their Mechwarriors. They range wildly in size and carry large differences in battle mechs. Some carry 4, others carry as much as a full battalion, which is 36. Or in the cases of a clan overlord, a stunning 45 battle mechs. Mech carriers are a staple of the franchise. In Mechwarrior 5 and Battletech from Harebrained Schemes, often the main character will drop live into a firefight aboard a Leopard dropship, simulating the deadly engagements these brave pilots face in the 31st and 32nd centuries. Battlefields across every possible area of space or planet are where these machines land, with the help of these dropships. Moons, swamps, forests, open plains, cities, wastelands, it doesn't matter. These gigantic vessels, weighing thousands of tons, sweep in or come roaring down from above, their engines howling, and deposit the Mechwarriors to the surface. Every battle played out in the setting, or in the tabletop, is often connected with one of these hulking ships. Though fighter carriers may decide if a battle will take place, and though troop transports and vehicle transports may pitch the most battles, the stars of the show, the centerpiece wars, are always fought with mechs, and they are delivered by their carriers. These vessels, from the humble manatee all the way forward to the imposing overlord and beyond, are the life's blood of the setting, or even the chariots of the godlike machines that are these fusion-powered battle mechs. But this isn't all. This presentation wouldn't go far without me delving into these kinds of ships as well, ones which are more multi-role, even if they often fall into one category or another in terms of their placement. They truly aren't. They fit into their own slot, in my opinion. These are dropships which are not simply mech carriers, or fighter carriers, or vehicle carriers, that fill a military purpose. These mobile bastions are perhaps ones to be the most feared, as they contain a combined arms force that will break through any barrier. There are 2 prominent examples among Inner Sphere assets during most of its history, namely the Excalibur and the Fortress. The former is larger than the latter, but the latter was depicted in Battletech, the video game, and was the primary, horrifying military asset for the campaign to face down, showing up as a result of the Taurian Concordat. In the instance of the Fortress, it carries within it 12 heavy vehicles, 12 battle mechs, and a full complement of 3 infantry platoons. As if this weren't enough, it has a staggering Long Tom 3 artillery cannon, taking up its final bay. This allows it to provide ground artillery support for the forces it deploys. It is a nightmare to see descending upon a planet, when its 6,000-ton frame comes rocketing down from the sky, or perhaps more horrifyingly, when they are deployed in numbers. The forces they face on the planet which they now land on will be faced with a terrible, mobile army, complete with heavy artillery support. In the future, if the future delves further into the Ilclan era and expands on newer, bigger, and more powerful military dropships, it's hard to not imagine that the Excalibur and the Fortress will be the models for future design. The dropship may have fallen into one space for so long, but as when transports and shuttles turned into dropships, dropships may yet evolve further themselves. The dropship comes in many shapes and sizes. To go over its roles once more, and everything it encompasses at least as far as has been covered in this video, dropships are responsible, just as much as jumpships, for facilitating all significant interplanetary trade and travel. It is the primary means of deploying military formations across the same area, now using modern designs built for these dedicated roles, whether that be transporting mechs, vehicles, or infantry. They act as aircraft carriers in the skies above worlds being defended or conquered, and they are the primary means of bringing down other warships in this sense. Finally, they are converted into fast, dedicated attack craft, capable of scouring the stars of their enemies. Battletech wouldn't be Battletech without them. The setting is all the richer for having them in it. These, more often than not, huge orbs of destruction have been with the setting since the start, and will be with the setting forevermore. There is more to Battletech than mechs, or even just combat. Dropships not only contribute to the latter of these things, but let Battletech be a living, breathing world for audiences to read, understand, and explore. They are the gateways to our imaginations. Thank you for joining me here today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. I do updates very frequently and you'll be happy with most of the content, I think. Also, a huge thank you to all the YouTube members for this channel. When you hit the join button and become a member, you take an extra step in supporting the content that this channel does, and I can't thank you enough, because this content is only possible because of viewers like you. And with that, I will see you all in the comment section below.